It was supposed to be just another night of exploring, a harmless thrill. San Antonio, Texas, has its fair share of eerie spots, but nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered that night. It was my senior year of high school, right when the world was shutting down due to the pandemic. With nowhere else to go and nothing much to do, my friends and I had developed a habit of sneaking out and exploring late at night. This wasn't out of character for me. I've always had a fascination with haunted places and creepy adventures. Fear? Not really my thing. Or so I thought. This story, though, wasn't about my friends. It was about Clarissa, a girl from my high school I'd recently started dating. She wasn't exactly the adventurous type, but somehow, I convinced her to join me for a late-night walk in the woods. Not just any woods. The Opschnabel Park, a beautiful, scenic place during the day, but a whole other beast after sundown. To make things even more unsettling, this wasn't your average spooky forest. In 2016, a 24-year-old woman had been brutally stabbed there over 20 times. Just last year, a boy exploring the trails at night had been shot. I told Clarissa we'd be fine. We'll just take a quick loop and head back, I said. Famous last words. We arrived around 3 a.m., the witching hour. The kind of quiet that night carried wasn't natural. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Moonlight barely broke through the thick canopy above, and I opted to keep my flashlight off. It's better to let your eyes adjust, I told Clarissa. Plus, I don't want anyone seeing the light from far away. She didn't respond, just clung to my arm. I could feel the tension radiating off her. We had been walking for about 15 or 20 minutes along the main trail when I suggested we take a shortcut I knew, a smaller, unmarked trail that would loop us back to the truck faster. She hesitated but agreed, and we turned off the main path. The air felt heavier on this side, the kind of silence that wasn't just quiet, it was loud, pressing down on us. And then we heard it, a flute. At first it was faint, almost melodic, like it was playing a tune meant to be soothing. But there was something wrong about it. The way it echoed, how it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, sent chills down my spine. I froze, and so did Clarissa. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The tune wasn't random. It had rhythm, like someone was deliberately playing a piece of music. But who would be playing a flute in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m.? Before I could even think of an answer, the sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't just creepy, it was invasive, like it was inside my head. Clarissa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She started to shake, whispering prayers under her breath, pleading with God to protect her. That's when I realized how serious this was. Fear isn't just about what you see or hear. It's about what you feel. And right then, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered terror. The flute's haunting melody continued, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. We couldn't see where it was coming from. It seemed to move, first from one side of the trail, then the other. It played with our senses, disorienting us. "We have to go," I said firmly, grabbing Clarissa's hand. She didn't argue, didn't even question me. We turned back the way we came, walking briskly at first, but then we heard it, the crunch of leaves, the snapping of twigs. Something was moving in the woods, and it wasn't us. We broke into a sprint, running blindly through the trail, the sound of the flute growing impossibly louder with every step. Then, out of nowhere, something darted across the path in front of us. A shadow, too fast and too big to be anything ordinary. I didn't see what it was, but I felt it. The sheer presence of it was overwhelming, like it took up all the space around us. We stopped dead in our tracks, panting, trying to process what had just happened. "Did you see that?" I asked, but Clarissa didn't answer. She just kept looking over her shoulder, her face pale as a ghost. The flute had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It wasn't over. We both knew it. We started moving again, taking slow, deliberate steps back toward the main trail. That's when it happened. The flute started again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was loud, almost deafening, and it sounded like it was right on top of us. It wasn't just music, it felt taunting, like whoever, or whatever, was playing and wanted us to know we couldn't escape. Fight or flight kicked in. I grabbed Clarissa's hand again and whispered, "Run." We bolted toward the main path, our footsteps pounding against the dirt. My heart felt like it would explode, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Somewhere in the chaos, the flute stopped, but we didn't. We kept running, the truck our only goal. When we finally reached the parking lot, I fumbled with the keys, barely able to unlock the door with my trembling hands. We jumped in, slammed the doors shut, and I peeled out of there as fast as the truck would go. Neither of us spoke on the ride home. What could we even say? The next day, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was just a prank, maybe some musician messing around in the woods. But no matter how much I searched online, I couldn't find anything about flutes or strange noises in that area. I asked my friends, other locals. No one had heard of anything like it. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that forest. Clarissa refuses to talk about it, and honestly, I don't blame her. But every once in a while, late at night, I think I hear it. That melody. Faint, almost like it's calling me back. And that's the thing about fear. It doesn't just live in the moment. It lingers, hiding in the corners of your mind, waiting to remind you that some questions are better left unanswered. What would you have done if you heard the flute? Would you have stayed to find out who or what was playing it? Working the night shift in a hospital is a strange kind of solitude. The world outside is asleep, and inside, the endless hum of machines and the occasional squeak of shoes on tile floors make you feel like you're the last person on earth. I was a pharmacy technician at the time, responsible for stocking the operating rooms and delivering medications to various floors. The job was straightforward, but the night shift brought with it a silence that felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. It was a Tuesday night, my 6th consecutive shift, and exhaustion had settled into my bones. I'd been awake for over 30 hours at this point, and though I was used to the grueling hours, this night felt heavier, like the air itself was thicker. I plugged in my headphones, letting music drown out the eerie quiet as I wheeled my cart down the hallways to stock the surgical rooms. Normally, the OR is a buzz of activity, but by 2 a.m., the surgeries were done and the rooms were empty. Or so I thought. I was in one of the operating rooms, filling up the medication dispensary, when I heard it, the distinct creak of a door opening behind me. It wasn't a gentle sound. It was sharp and drawn out, like the door hadn't been oiled in years. I turned around instinctively, expecting to see a surgeon or a nurse who needed something, but the room was empty. The door was shut. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Maybe the wind, I told myself, even though I knew that made no sense. I went back to work, but my senses were on high alert now, every sound amplified. A sudden thud echoed from the hallway, followed by silence so profound it felt deafening. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of too little sleep. But then it happened again. The next room I entered was dark. I flicked on the lights and froze. Someone was hunched over the sharps container, their hands moving as though searching for something. My first thought was that it was an employee, maybe someone looking for discarded medication, which wasn't unheard of. I cleared my throat, ready to confront them, but the second the light hit them, they were gone. Not ran away gone. They just weren't there anymore. The room was empty. The sharps container hadn't been touched. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But no amount of reasoning could shake the unease that had taken root deep in my gut. I finished docking the oar and wheeled my cart back into the hallway, determined to finish my rounds as quickly as possible. The hospital was a labyrinth of identical corridors, each one as desolate as the last. The 5th floor was especially unsettling. It was undergoing renovations, and half the floor was shut down. No patients, no staff, just empty rooms, and the faint smell of paint. As I walked down the hallway, the silence was broken by a sound I'll never forget: the mechanical creak of a hospital bed rocking back and forth. It was coming from room 5512, one of the empty rooms. My rational brain told me to keep walking, to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the room and immediately regretted it. There, in the middle of the room, was an old man. He was convulsing violently on the bed, his body jerking in unnatural ways. Blood poured from his eyes, nose, and mouth, staining the white sheets beneath him. The monitor next to the bed was screaming with alarms, its lights flashing like a warning. I stood frozen in the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room was empty again. The bed was neatly made, the monitor silent and off. It was as if nothing had ever been there. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest as I stumbled backward into the hallway. I didn't know what I had just seen, but it was enough to make me abandon the rest of my rounds and head back to the pharmacy. When the elevator doors opened, I felt my stomach drop. Standing there, waiting for the elevator, was the same old man. He wasn't convulsing now, he was standing upright, wearing a security badge and smiling like he knew me. I couldn't breathe. He stepped into the elevator, brushed past me, and gave my shoulder a pat. His hand was cold. I turned to watch him as the doors closed, and I saw the elevator numbers climb back to the 5th floor. I didn't press the button to call the elevator back, but after a few seconds, it returned to the 1st floor. When the doors opened, the elevator was empty. I spent the rest of my shift in the pharmacy, unable to leave my chair. I couldn't explain what had just happened, and every attempt to rationalize it only made me more anxious. Was I hallucinating? Maybe. But why would I hallucinate someone so specific, someone I'd never seen before? The night finally ended, and as I left the hospital, I glanced up at the 5th floor window out of instinct. My blood ran cold. There he was, the old man, staring down at me, smiling that same knowing smile. I've worked night shifts since then, but I never go near the 5th floor anymore. Whatever I saw that night, I don't want to see it again. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. There's a kind of comfort that comes with being home, a sense of safety, of familiarity. But that illusion shatters the moment you realize someone or something has violated that space. For me, that realization came one October weekend when my boyfriend was out of town for a bachelor party in Las Vegas. I'd stayed behind, looking forward to a quiet weekend at home in our small but cozy house. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked during the day and exchanged pleasantries with strangers on their morning jogs. It was the last place you'd expect something sinister to happen. It all started innocently enough. On Friday night, I invited a few friends over for a wine night. We sat in the living room, surrounded by the warm glow of candles, watching cheesy horror movies and laughing at how predictable they were. But as the night stretched on, something shifted. The laughter faded when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sound itself that unnerved us. It was the timing. Who rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? We all froze, exchanging uneasy glances. I crept to the door, peeking through the small pane of glass at the top. The driveway was full. My friends' cars lined up like a beacon signaling that the house was occupied. But there was no one on the porch. My heart raced as I turned back to the group. "No one's there," I whispered. Nervous laughter followed as we tried to brush it off as a prank, but the tension in the room was palpable. When my friends left later that night, I locked up and went to bed, trying to shake the unease. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, the doorbell rang again, twice. The sound jolted me awake, and I grabbed my phone, heart pounding. It was 1 a.m. This time, I didn't even bother looking. I called my boyfriend, hoping he'd know what to do. He answered from a noisy bar, his voice slurred but concerned. "Don't open the door," he said firmly. "Stay in the bedroom. If it happens again, call the police." His words were meant to reassure me, but they didn't. I hung up and tried to convince myself it was nothing, a drunk neighbor maybe, or some kids messing around. But just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it. A faint clicking sound, like someone tapping on glass. I froze, my eyes darting to the window. The curtains were closed, thank God. But the sound was unmistakable. Click, click, click. Then a man's voice. "Hey, is anyone home? I need help." My blood turned cold. He sounded calm, almost friendly, but there was something off about the tone, like he was trying too hard to sound harmless. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and then he said, "I know you're in there." That was it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver as I reported a potential intruder. The operator assured me officers were on their way, but those few minutes felt like hours. The doorbell rang again, and then there was pounding, loud, forceful, like whoever it was wanted to break the door down. I stayed in the bedroom, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline, until I heard the unmistakable sound of voices outside. The police. Relief washed over me as I opened the door to find two officers standing on my porch. One of them, tall and imposing, stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We got a report of a disturbance," he said curtly. I explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. But as I spoke, his demeanor shifted. He wasn't just dismissive, he was condescending. "Well, did you see the guy?" he asked. When I said no, he smirked. "So you're telling me you called us for what noises?" His tone made me feel small, like I'd overreacted. His partner remained silent, standing stiffly by the door. Despite his attitude, they walked the perimeter of the house, shining their flashlights into every corner. When they returned, the tall officer shrugged. "Nothing out there. Probably just kids messing around." He gave me a look that said he didn't believe a word I'd said. As they left, I locked the door and leaned against it, exhausted and frustrated. I wanted to feel safe, but I didn't. Not really. The next day, I threw myself into errands, trying to distract myself. By evening, I was feeling better. My friend was hosting a Halloween party, and I decided to go, hoping the noise and laughter would drown out the lingering unease. It worked for a while, but when I came home later that night, everything fell apart. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was the cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from forgetting to turn on the heat, but a bone-deep chill that made my skin crawl. Then I saw it. The living room window was open. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. My stomach dropped as I approached to close it, every step feeling heavier than the last. I shut the window and locked it, my mind racing with rationalizations. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe. I was halfway down the hallway when I noticed the basement door. It was ajar. I stopped, my heart hammering in my chest. That door was always shut. Always. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. A faint clicking sound drifted up from the darkness below. It was the same sound I'd heard the night before. Click, click, click. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring into the black void. Then a voice. Low, gravelly and too calm. "You're finally home." I slammed the door shut, locking it before bolting out the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they let me in. From there, I called the police again. When the officers arrived, it was the same two from the night before. This time, the tall one's smug attitude was gone. He and his partner searched the house thoroughly, but they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. Nothing out of place, except for the open window and the basement door. They told me it was safe to go back inside, but I couldn't do it. I packed a bag and stayed with my sister until my boyfriend returned. Even now, months later, I can't stay home alone without feeling like someone is watching. The worst part? Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. Click, click, click.